Okay, so I'm recording now. I just gotta, no, it's working. Okay. Just a reminder, if you have questions or anything like that, feel free to interrupt at any point, but you will be part of the recording, and you can use the chat as well. The recording is going now. So we're going to learn some CSS. I'm going to share my screen, uh, and we'll get started. So I'm going to share the URL to this new version so you guys can follow along on there, or you can, fork the project later. So I'm just going to copy the URL up here, and I'll put that in the. And so we're going to start with CSS today. If we just Google CSS, you'll get. I thought it would be the first one, but it's like the fourth one. Here's the Mozilla docs on CSS. This is sort of the authoritative guide to what most CSS is and web languages. CSS stands for cascading style sheets. The style just refers to that we're adding style elements to our page, so things like color and typography. The sheet is just, it's a document. And then the cascading part is kind of the confusing part. Cascading basically refers to the way that the styles get added, meaning that we can have like multiple different rules for how to add a style, and the ones that come later will overwrite the ones that come before. We're probably not going to get that advanced in this lesson, but just to explain where that name comes from, it's sort of cascading means like, look up what is cascading. Pour downward rapidly in large quantities, or arrange a number of devices or objects in a series or sequence. So I think it's really more this second definition. It doesn't obviously have anything to do with water, but you kind of get the sense of a cascade. It's like a series of things. And so in CSS, we can have a series of different rules, and they get applied in the order that they appear on the page. So there's a bunch of different like tutorials and links and stuff here. Let's click on this CSS basics. And this is just like the most basic example of CSS. And that's what we're going to write today. And so we'll go over the syntax here. And we'll be able to add some styles to our page. So you can see this rule here is a paragraph tag, and it sets the color to red. And the result is that the text is red. We also need to add our CSS page to our HTML file, so we'll look at how to do that as well. So we're really just going to get started with some real basic stuff here, and just add a few different. So I'm going to increase my font size a little bit, hopefully to make this more legible. And we'll get started. So one thing that we have to do first is add a link to our CSS. So we actually have to update our HTML before we move over to CSS. And it's easy to do this. We just use a specific type of tag called a link tag. You may think this sounds like our anchor tag, which links to another page, but this is a little bit different. This is just linking up document to this specific page to give it the style rules. So this link tag has some attributes. It does not have any content, so we don't need a closing tag. So for the link tag, we do have an href, which is the location of our style sheet. And for this page, you can see the style.css and the index.html are on the same file structure or file level. So we can just link directly to style.css. So Replit gives me this little menu, and I can scroll down and click on style.css. And then I have to also tell the document what type of document this is. So I'm going to say type equals text/CSS. And then I also have to tell it this thing called relationship, which is like what's the relationship between the two documents, and that is style sheet. So this is kind of a long one, but that's everything I have to write. And this basically loads the rules from my CSS style sheet into the page that we're looking at. And so if we didn't do this, we could write CSS styles, but they just wouldn't show up because we're basically not telling our document where to find those CSS styles. Okay, so let's open up style.css. Replit has already created this for us. And it has some basic styles in here. I'm going to actually delete these and start from scratch with my own styles. And as we add styles, we will see our website update over. So one of the things that's nice about CSS and the way that we develop on the web in general is we separate our things. So we separate our content from our style. So that way, instead of having to go to every page on our website and say, I want the background to be blue, or I want the images to be this big, I can have one page that defines all those rules and then apply it to every single page. I only need one style sheet, and then it's going to affect, or it's going to be added to every HTML page, of which I have a lot since I'm telling this interactive story. So I have a bunch of HTML pages in my document. So I'm going to start out with a little comment. In CSS, our comments look a little bit different. We use a / and an asterisk to say this is the beginning of a comment. So this is a comment. And then we use an asterisk and a / at the end to say this is the end of a comment. So comments, again, are not part of our code. They're just places where we can write notes. And so this is a good place to add, information about what this style sheet is for. And you might say who the author is, and you might reference like where you got, if you got some code somewhere, you could reference a link to where you found it. So there's lots of stuff that you can do with comments. I'm just going to say style sheet or choose your own adventure story. And then we'll get started. So I'm going to demonstrate a basic tag first, and then we'll kind of go back and look at a few different things that we can do. So if I want to do a CSS rule, sometimes it's helpful if I drag my CSS over here, although now we can't see the preview. But when I write a CSS rule, I have to use a tag from my HTML to make the CSS rule work. This is called a selector. So a selector is an HTML tag. There are more complicated selectors, but we're just going to start with the basics. So an example of that is just P. The P over here matches the P of my paragraph tags on the HTML. So we start with a selector. There's three parts to a CSS rule. So we start with a selector, then we have a property. A property is things like the color, size, etc. And following the property, we have a value. And a value is the the value of the property. So a value for a color could be like blue. A value for a size could be like 100 pixels, something like that. So we'll go over some of those units. I'm not going to talk too much about layout today. We'll talk about that on Thursday. But values can be colors. They could be fonts. So I could have a font like Times New Roman is a font, and other values like that. So let's just start out with our paragraph tag. So once we have a tag, we put these little curly brackets here. The curly brackets I can find by holding Shift and then hitting the left bracket key, which is on your keyboard next to the P key, typically, to the right of P. And so if I hit that, Replit is going to make these two opening and closing brackets for me. And all of the CSS rules that I put inside here will apply to that paragraph. So if I say color, that's my property. And then I put a colon, and now I put my value. Let's do green as an example. And then I put a semicolon at the end to signify that I'm done with this rule. So this is one rule, a property, and a value, and it's being assigned to this paragraph selector. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and then we'll go back to our web view, and now you can see the text of my paragraphs is green. The text of my H1 and my links is still their original colors, but my paragraphs are now green. And so that is just a very basic CSS rule. And by using this format, we can add lots of different rules to our page. So I'm going to move this style sheet back over here so we'll see the updates as we write them. So if I change this color here, I can change it to red, and then we'll see the text turns red. And there's just like basically a ton of CSS values and properties. So you can't really like memorize them. They're not really based on logic. As you learn more, you'll kind of like memorize some of them. But generally, if you want to know how to do something or if something exists, you can just Google it. So if I'm doing CSS, I can just write, I'm like, what I want to change the font, I would just say like CSS font. And then usually I'll see, some different examples. Let's say I want it to be Times New Roman, although that's the default, so we won't see the difference. Let's say I want it to be Comic Sans. This Stack Overflow website is a really good website. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Stack Overflow is a good website for finding stuff on code. People ask questions and people answer them. And pretty much, I use this website constantly. And so this question is saying, I'm trying to add this font to my CSS. How come it doesn't work? And then they have this very simple answer with some code that we can just copy and paste. So I can say, okay, I missed these quotation marks. CSS is a little weird. Sometimes you have to have quotation marks, sometimes you don't. It's not very consistent. So that's why you can't really memorize it. You kind of just have to look stuff up. But anyway, so this is my rule: font family, Comic Sans MS, and then Comic Sans is a backup, and then cursive is a backup. So sometimes computers don't have every font, and so you need a backup font. So I'm just gonna copy this. I just hit Control C, but you can also select it and hit copy. And then I'll go back to my style sheet, and I can make a new rule just by hitting Enter to go to a new line, and hit Paste here. And then I'll save this. And now we see that rule gets applied. Again, it's only applied to the paragraphs. It's not applied to the entire website because I've only applied it to the P tag. So I only get those rules on the paragraph itself. Okay, so let's add some more rules. There's a couple websites that are really useful. One is HTML color codes. This will show you all the colors that you can use for CSS. So you can use different types of values, but there's also names. So if you go to HTML color names, being slow, you can see all of the names that you can use for different colors. And then you can also see their corresponding values. We won't go over this today because it's a little more advanced, but maybe we'll cover it later. But you can see all the different colors that you can use. And then Replit, of course, is going to give you hints for colors. So if I'm like looking for a color and I start with like O, it's going to actually show me all these colors that start with O. I was looking for orange, but there's also orange red. But there's also these other colors like old lace and olive and orchid. It might be kind of nice, like a little purple color, kind of cool. So you can get hints from Replit. It's going to help you write stuff when you're adding code. So let's put this link into our comment up here. I'll call this helpful CSS websites. Of course, the first one is MDN. Let's put that there. And then the other one is CSS font stack. This website is really good because it shows you all the fonts, but it also tells you how likely they are to be available on different platforms. So these are all the different sans serif fonts. Sans serif means fonts that don't have like the little edges or the little feet on the different forms. So let's just look at that real quick because you guys may or may not know what that means. So let's see if we can find a good side by side. There we go. So serif fonts have these little feet you can see on the T where they come out at the edges. Those are more sort of classic style fonts. Sans serif, meaning without serif, just have straight lines for the most part, or they might be curved or something like that, but they don't have the little feet. And then there's lots of fonts that kind of play with things in the middle. But that's the main difference between serif and sans serif. So we see sans serif; those are generally more popular on the web. But the nice thing about this is it actually shows you, like, if I want to find a font, it shows me. It says, like, for this one, it says Windows is 83% and Mac is 34%. So that means that most Windows computers have this font and will display it correctly on the computer. But most Mac computers don't have this font. And so there's ways to get around that, but if you don't want to go through those extra steps, we can just look for fonts that have high support on both platforms. Or if you don't care about one platform or the other, that's fine. So let's check out Comic Sans. It's going to be somewhere around here. Or maybe it's not. I'll just do a Control F, Comic Sans. Okay, I guess it's not on this page. It's kind of weird. I don't know why they wouldn't have that one, but I think it's a pretty widely used font, so I'm just going to stick with it. Anyway, that website is really useful. It also shows you what the fonts look like, which is useful. I'm going to paste that in there. Okay, so let's keep going. So one of the things that you've probably noticed is that I've added these rules to my page, but it only affects the paragraph. So what would I do if I wanted my entire page to look like this? Well, there's a couple things. One is I could add the other selectors. So I could say H1, and I could say color is orchid, and I could say font family is Comic Sans MS. And so now I have both the H1s, although I spelled font family wrong. So let's go back and add that Y in there. Okay, so now my H1s and my Ps are pink and using the correct font, but I had to repeat these rules. So that doesn't look that good. So one thing I can do to fix that is I can actually add my selectors together. I could say P comma H1, and I can add both of these selectors to the same rule. But I can also use a selector that has both my paragraphs and my headers inside of them, because remember the cascading part. So if I add these rules to one of my HTML nodes that has everything else inside it, it's going to add those rules to everything inside of it. So if I look back at index.html and I have an H1 and a paragraph, but both of these are inside this body tag. Okay, so what will happen if I add these rules to the body tag instead of the individual tags? Let's give that a shot. So I'm just going to change this to body. And now we're going to see all of our text now has a pink color and our Comic Sans font. So everything that's inside the body tag will adopt these rules. The only thing that doesn't is my anchor tags, because they have their own defaults. So if I want to set those, I have to set anchor tag and set the color to orchid. And now that'll match. So now my whole website has the same colors. And you might like your anchor tags having a different color or having the specific blue color. It's kind of up to you. You can change those rules to whatever you think looks good. So we've already got a couple good things going on. We changed the text color, we changed the font. Let's change a few more things. So color always means text. It's a little confusing because it doesn't say like text color. It's just color. Color always refers to the text. So let's put a little comment here. Color refers to text. So if we want to change other colors, like the background color, we have to use other rules. So another rule we can use is background-color. And so let's say I want to set this to a different color. I could say blue. And now I have a blue website. And I could say, you know what, that looks okay, but it's a little too bright. Like it's a little too bright for my eyes. One of the nice things about Replit is if I click on this little color preview here, you can actually like choose different colors, hit enter, and Replic's going to fill in this like special hex color value for me. And so I actually don't even have to look it up. Replic's just going to put it there for me. So that's one of the nice things about what we're using in integrated development environment, is that they build these tools for us to make it easier to write our code. That's a little too light. It's hard to read the text. I'm going to make this darker and see if that looks good. That looks much better. Actually, it almost looks the same color as the Replit theme, which is a little confusing. So maybe I'll make it a little bit more saturated by adding more color there and see how that looks. Okay, that looks pretty good. There's enough contrast between the text and the background that I can still read the text. If I had a very similar light color like this, it'd be very hard to read the text because the text and the color are kind of in the same color space. Even though they're different colors, if they're kind of the same brightness, it makes it very hard to actually read because there's no contrast. Contrast is the difference between the two colors. And so usually if we have a light color for our text, we need a darker color, our background, to create more contrast. Okay, so that looks better. So we can also do things with our text. So if I say font size and I want to set it larger, I could say like 100 pixels. PX is the shorthand for pixels. That's going to be way too big, right? Okay, so the H1 is 100 pixels, but it also adds to it because it's an H1. H1s by default have higher text size. And then my paragraphs are like way too big. So that is too big. So let's make it smaller. Let's try like maybe 40 pixels. Okay, that's a little better, but my H1s are still too big. So this is one that I might want to only assign to my paragraphs and not my H1s. So I can say paragraph and then say font size is 40 pixels. That's still a little big. Maybe we try like 30. There we go. So now it's almost as big as the H1, but the H1 is also bold. So it still stands out a little bit. But maybe we'll make it a little bit smaller. Maybe I'll do like 24 pixels. So it's a little bigger than the default, but it's not too big. And now my paragraphs are bigger than my links. So let's make sure the links are nice and big. So let's add that rule down here as well. 24 pixels. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, so we've added some colors. We've changed the font. We've changed the font size. There's a whole lot of other things that we can do, but these are kind of like some of the basic ways that we can change our the way our website looks. We can also do things like, for example, if I want to have a centered header, I can say text align is center. And now my header is going to be in the middle of my website. That looks pretty good. You know, you might want to do different things. We're going to talk more about layout on Thursday. So I want to talk about one more thing, which is different units. And then I'm going to show you guys how to inspect these rules and try different stuff out in the browser. And then that will be it for today. So we're just going to do a few basic rules. You guys can play around with the colors, play around with the fonts, and you know, make things look a little bit different. So one last thing that I want to show you guys is there are different units. So some of our properties like colors, they have different types of rules. They have names like orchid, or they have these things called hex values, which is like a way to add lots of different colors by referring to specific color numbers. But this is using a new format that just basically can capture more numbers than usual. But we also have things that like have measurements. So like 24 pixels is the number of pixels on your actual computer. But we also have relative measurements. And so a relative measurement might look something like this. I could say font size is 2EM. Okay, if I save that, my font size is going to be a little bit bigger. So what does EM mean? EM is a term that comes from like original typography, like actually laying out like little metal blocks of text into like a printing press. But it basically means the default font size. So the default font size for HTML is 16 pixels. Let's delete this for a second. And so if we do 2EM, we're just saying 2 times 16, and that gives us 32 pixels. So if we change the default font size, so if I go up to the body and I say, instead of 16, I want the font size to be 18 pixels, you're going to see that the EMs change as well. So even though 2EM didn't change, by changing the default font size up here, the relative amount of 1 EM changes. So now we're saying 18 times 2. And if I lower the default font size to 12 pixels, now 2EM is just 24. So EM is a relative measure of the base font size. And there's like a lot of different relative measures now in CSS, especially they've added a lot over the years for different things like the size of the window, the size of like, the parent object, like all of these different things, or the parent node in your HTML tree. But that's one of the basics. Just so you're aware, you'll see lots of different rules that use different units. So units, let's put a note up here. Some values, not all values, but some values have units. px is screen pixels. em is relative to base font size. You can also use percentages. We'll go over that on Thursday more with layout. But I think this is enough to cover for today. I actually want to change my link color because I don't want it to be exactly the same as my text color. So I'm going to choose something that's going to stand out a little bit against this, maybe something yellow. I accidentally created Lakers colors, but that's okay. Not gonna, well, actually, maybe I'll make it like orangier so it's not quite so Lakers-y. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Okay, so those are just a few basic rules. We'll go over some more on Thursday, but first, before we go, I want to, or before we end the demo, I want to show you guys how we can look at these rules in the browser and then also change them. So when I open up my preview window by clicking on the open in a new tab button, you'll see the website that I just created, but now it's in a full browser page on its own. You see it looks a little bit different, like when this is centered, it's kind of like in the middle of this big document. That's another thing we will look at with layout. But for now, I want to show you guys this inspect thing. Oh, maybe you can't, I don't know if that shows up on the stream, but when I right click on the window, I come up with a little menu, and the very bottom of the menu is a button called Inspect. You can also go to the Chrome menu and go to More Tools, and then go to Developer Tools. So either way, you can open up this little side window, which has a lot of different stuff that shows us stuff about how the website works. So for example, like the network tab, this actually shows you how long it takes to download your website. So if you're a developer, you're going to want to, look at how long did it take my style sheet to download or my images. And you can see 125 milliseconds. It's pretty quick, so I'm not too worried about that. Same thing. All these are really fast. So my website doesn't have that much stuff going on. It goes very fast. If you're a web developer, you're going to use these tools a lot to look at the performance of the website. But what we're going to look at today is this Elements tab. And you can see in here, this is all of the HTML on our website. Let me increase the zoom a little bit. I don't want to make it too big. So the Elements tab is really nice because we can look at something. If something's not working the way you want it to, you can open up the Elements tab and see maybe you missed a bracket or something like that. But it also shows you your CSS rules. So you can test stuff out and see it change in front of you and then add it to your code if you want to. So these changes are not going to be permanent changes. So for example, if I'm not so sure about the body color, I can look at the CSS rules. I can toggle the color on and off, and then I can click on the color, and I can try different colors. And I can say, I can look at different hues. And none of this is actually being saved or changing my real website. This is just what I see on the front end. So if I try that and I'm not really interested in that, if I like that, I could copy this and paste it into my code. But when I refresh the website, it's going to go back to whatever it was originally. So the inspector and developer tools are really, really useful way to test out how your rules look. Take a look at your HTML, take a look at what's happening. You can also see all the default rules here. So we talked about the anchor tag has a default blue color. And you can see that right here. It says color default is web link, WebKit link. That's that blue color that you see by default if we don't set the color here. And so that shows you all of the defaults and then the original colors. And you can also see, again, the cascading. So this anchor tag, it starts by adding the body color down here, but then you can see this gets crossed out. It gets overwritten by another color, which is this default WebKit link. But then that gets crossed out because we added our own color here, which we can see there. So when I'm working on a website, I basically always have this section open so that I can very quickly test different things. When we hover over the different parts of the website, you can see it highlights the corresponding part. And that's a good way to see some stuff with the layout, which we'll talk about on Thursday. And we can also edit this stuff. I can change this just to see what it would feel like if I said choose your own adventure. So I can edit the content here, see what it looks like, but it's not saved to the original document. If I refresh the page, again, it goes away. And just like I showed you guys last time with the source, I can do this on any website. So if I go to newyorktimes.com and I click on a headline and click inspect, oops, New York Times has a lot of crap running on it. But anyway, here we go. So there's that headline. We can see it's an H1. It's got some attributes, some stuff that we haven't talked about yet, but don't worry about that. And then we have the content. I could change this. I could say analysis, I don't know, hello world or whatever, make my own little New York Times headline. Of course, I'm not editing their actual website. I'm just editing the way it looks on the front end. I could change the color over here. I could say color is red if I want to see what that looks like. And so I can look at other websites and see how they're created. I can see all of their rules as well. So in general, when it comes to CSS, if you want to know how to do something, there's a million different rules and they all have their different units and different weird ways of being written. So it's really easier just to Google stuff than it is to really figure things out or try to remember things, I mean. There's one more thing I have to go over, which is we have to add this to other pages of our website. So if I go to About, all of my styles disappear. And so remember at the very beginning, we went to index.html and we added this link right here. So we're going to go over adding this to the other pages. So I'm going to copy the link and go to my About page. And I just have to paste this in here. This goes in the head section. It can go either above or below the title. It doesn't matter which order it is. But if I do this now, all those styles get added to that page. Same thing with my friends page. I'm going to need to go open up friends.html and find the head section and add the style sheet in there. Okay, so now my friends page will have the style. But what's going to happen if I go to one of my story pages? Remember, we put this in its own folder. Okay, so let's go to Forest Left. I'm going to close some of this stuff. So if I go in here and I add my style sheet, some of you are probably already going to know what's going to happen here. It's not going to work at first, even though we can see there it is right there. The problem, we covered this with our links and our images. The problem is that forest left is inside the story folder and style.css is in the main folder. So forest left cannot see the main files. It can only see files that are inside this story folder. So to go back one directory, remember I just do .. / and so that's going to look back into the previous directory and find that style sheet. So now if I reload this, there we go. We have our styles. I'll do the same thing with forest right. So I just paste this in, .. / Now we've got our style sheet there. Okay. So one last thing, I'm going to go to this left page and I'm going to give you an example of something. So I haven't covered this, but let's say you wanted to set this background image to the whole page instead of, since we're already in the forest left, let's set this to the whole background instead of just being on the page. So with other CSS rules, again, the easiest thing to do is just Google what you're looking for. Because there's lots of different rules and they have their different syntaxes. So I'm going to open a new tab. I'm going to say CSS background image. And there's a few different options here. I'll usually either look for, there's no Stack Overflow. So that's usually my first go-to. CSS Tricks is a really good website. MDN, of course, is a good website. Let's try CSS Tricks. I think they're a good resource. Okay, so here we see using an image on a background is pretty simple. Body, background URL, sweet texture.jpg. This is some weird crap. We're not going to worry about that. Oh, it has gradients. That's pretty cool. Set a fallback color. That's nice. Multiple background images. Okay, that's kind of cool. We can add multiple images. And then it even has a demo of different versions of this code. So what I'm going to do is take the first example they give, and I'm just going to copy this rule. I'm going to copy this, go back to my style sheet, and go to body, and paste this in here. And actually, this is going to be a good chance to show something else related to CSS, but then I'm definitely going to finish soon. So obviously, this URL doesn't match the image that I want. So let's change that. Let's go into images / forest left.jpg. Save that. Okay, there we go. That made the background. Problem is, I didn't really think this through. Now it's on every single page, which is not really what I want. So I'll show you guys how to add some CSS just to one page. So let's, I'm going to copy this bit, but then I'm going to go to forest left. And this is the page where I want this. I can actually add multiple style sheets, and I can even write CSS directly into my HTML. So I generally avoid this because it means that, it's not separating my HTML from my CSS. But in this case, this is CSS that I only want on this really specific page. So it kind of makes sense just to put it directly in here. So if I do that tag in HTML style, I basically can write CSS directly in here. So I'm going to paste this section, but delete everything except the image. And then I'm going to delete the image from my original style sheet. Okay, this is called an internal style sheet. So this link up here is an external style sheet. And this link down here, or this style section, is an internal style sheet. So it's only going to apply to this page unless I copy and paste it into other pages. And it's not going to work. Same problem here, just with my CSS, with my images and my links, I still have to go back .. / to the main folder, then to images, then to forest left. So now I should see this on my left page only. There we go. There's that forest image. And I won't see it on any of my other pages. Okay, so that's a little bit of CSS stuff. There's obviously like a million different things to talk about when it comes to CSS, and we can't cover them all today or even in a semester. So we're just going to go over a few basics. And on Thursday, we'll do some more CSS. We'll do some layout stuff. So how do we move stuff around the page? How do we put stuff next to each other? That is what we'll talk about on Thursday. So I'm going to stop the recording here.